Thank you, Ms. Gain. Jenny Gain, followed by Jenny Rempel from the Community Water Center.
Good afternoon. My name is Jenny Gain, and I'm the staff engineer to CUA, the California Urban Water Agencies. For anyone that's unfamiliar with our organization, we're comprised of 10 of the largest public water agencies in the state that serve water to more than 26 million Californians, so more than 2/3 of the state's population. Water pricing is critically important to our agencies. Sorry, I'm a little nervous when I get up in front of you guys, so let me just take a breath. So our agencies have long been proponents of conservation, and each of our member agencies currently applies water pricing to promote conservation. Pricing is one of many mechanisms that improves water use efficiency, and while we recognize its value, it's just one element of a more comprehensive approach. Flexibility is needed for utilities to determine the best combination of measures needed to meet the challenges of the current drought and to achieve long-term water use efficiency. We really appreciate your openness in addressing this issue and exploring the topic of conservation pricing. We recognize that you're responding to the current drought and to the governor's executive order, and that you also face limitations in how you can respond. So though the state board doesn't play a role in rate setting, we do see several areas where you can help to support water agencies to help strengthen price signals. So these recommendations are included in the comment letter that we provided to you, and I'm going to distill it. There were 6 different responses in our comment letter directly responding to your 3 questions, but I'm just going to distill it into 4 main points in the interest of time. So the first is to recognize and value flexibility. So the state board's approach in responding to the current drought so far has been really about directing water suppliers in what to do, but leaving it up to the agencies to determine how to do it. So we'd encourage you to continue along this path and to allow for that flexibility and how agencies meet their goals. So there are many different definitions of conservation pricing and many rate structures that encourage efficient water use. So we ask that you not be prescriptive in how you define conservation pricing. There's no single rate structure that works for all agencies. And defining rates as specific structures could preclude local agencies from implementing what fits their local needs most. The second area is to clarify implications of the recent San Juan Capistrano ruling and share this clarification with water agencies and the public. So this really builds on the discussion on the last panel. Our understanding is that the ruling applies to just one specific application and does not preclude agencies from implementing tiered rates. There are many utilities, including all of our member agencies, that have detailed cost of studies, and that's really foundational to rates that comply with Prop 218. Unfortunately, the case has really diverted attention away from what's important, so we think that some clarification from the state board would really help everybody to move forward in the right direction. The third is provide a clearinghouse of case studies. So gather information from agencies throughout the state that are implementing conservation pricing, pricing that effectively promotes conservation, and use this information to help others to understand what's legal, defensible, and effective. And you could combine this information with resources from other organizations, water agencies and water associations, AWWA and others. They're doing quite a bit of good work, so leverage that into a toolbox of information that you could share with agencies. And the fourth is provide leadership and support on communication of rates. So a consistent message from the state would be really important for the value of water and the importance of services, as well as the substantial fixed costs that agencies have to deal with, and also coupled with the effects of the drought and the challenges of dealing with that, as well as climate change. It'd also be helpful to kind of create a bridge, so provide leadership to create a bridge of the messages. So there are all these messages that are being put out by these organizations doing great work, but they're all separate. So maybe bring that together and provide a clear, consistent communication from the statewide level. So with that, I'll close, but I'd like to offer that we're here to help. We'd love to work with you. So please let us know if you have any questions and if we can be of help.
Great, and thank you for that offer. That all good suggestions.
Thank you.
Hey, Jenny. Next speaker after Jenny will be, after Jenny 2, will be Phoebe Seaton, unless there are other Jennys that would like to speak.
Hi, my name is Jenny Rempel, and I work with the Community Water Center. And together with the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, Clean Water Action, American Rivers, California Coastkeeper Alliance, and NRDC, we submitted joint written comments, and I was going to share a few highlights. So we work together as an environmental justice organizations dedicated to creating a sustainable and equitable future for California. At CWC, we work with frontline communities that have been severely impacted by the drought, in some cases going over a year and a half with dry wells. So clearly, conservation measures are necessary during the drought and beyond as we adapt to a changing water supply framework in California. Rethinking our water supply structures presents a great opportunity to address the dual goals of promoting conservation and achieving the human right to water. So we're very excited by the focus on affordability that has been a theme today. Water affordability, as you know, is a central element to the human right to water. But despite the obvious importance of access to safe water, there's not a state policy that protects vulnerable individuals and communities from unaffordable rates. Thus, in developing conservation pricing programs and policies, we strongly encourage the development of conservation policies that do not put access to affordable, safe water further out of reach, but rather increase access to safe, reliable, and affordable water. We suggest several ways of leveraging conservation pricing to further the human right to water, including incorporating a public goods charge, developing a conservation signal in conjunction with affordability program, promoting conservation for all water users, industrial, commercial, and agricultural, as well as domestic users, creating a fund to support operations and maintenance costs, and finally reforming Prop 218. First, we propose incorporating a public goods charge or water fee designed to ensure affordable drinking water for low-income customers. The fund created could then be used to support rate subsidies to customers or regional projects like consolidations that would lower the cost of water delivery for the long term. Second, we suggest water utilities consider policies that encourage water use efficiency and conservation when designing affordability programs. This could be done by waiving or applying discounts to the fixed portion of the bill rather than the variable portion of the water bill to reflect customer usage. It could also be done by offering a percentage discount on the total water bill based on reducing average water use per particular household size. Third, we encourage you to consider conservation pricing policies that address water use equitably and fairly by developing policies that promote conservation not just with domestic users, but with industrial, commercial, and agricultural users as well. Fourth, we recommend creating a fund to support operation and maintenance costs where appropriate to ensure that water is safe and affordable. This fund could perhaps be derived from a fertilizer fee at the rate of state sales tax to address nitrate contamination. Another potential funding source would be fees or enforcement actions to require parties responsible for contamination to contribute an appropriate share of the cost of providing safe drinking water. And finally, as Mr. Snow and many others have mentioned, revisiting Proposition 218 is one mechanism to take on both conservation and affordability through lifeline rates. And we look forward to ensuring that conservation and affordability are considered in Prop 218 reform and other efforts to reform and improve water management throughout the state. So in conclusion, we think this is a great opportunity to simultaneously incentivize conservation and promote drinking water solutions that advance our state's work towards securing the human right to water for all Californians. We strongly encourage you to find solutions that address the joint goals of water conservation and water affordability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good.
Made me think of something. It's not really a question for the speaker, maybe even for Michael or the other attorneys. On the one hand, we heard the last panel that any public goods type charge would have to be borne by low-income ratepayers, or under, I think Ms. Salt said something like that. And yet, in the energy sector, we heard earlier from Ms. Clinton that the costs for certain elements, like the R&D element and the efficiency elements in energy, are allocated over all customers that are not low income. So I would like a little clarification.
I'll let Ms. Salt provide some clarity in terms of what she was saying, but from my perspective, if there were to be some sort of goods charge in the area of water, and recognizing some of the constitutional issues that Mr. Colantuno had raised with respect to Prop 26 compliance if it didn't get 2/3 vote in the legislature, I think outside of that constitutional restriction, there is largely plenary power for the legislature to craft, both the mechanisms you heard earlier today, for example, during Mr. Snow's presentation, the concept that rate would have flux to it based on the hydrologic conditions in the state, and that it might go down during abundant years and then up in drought years. Likewise, the legislature, I think, would have plenary power, again, within putting aside the constitutional issue, to tailor it based on income, use levels, all those different variables.
And again, I think it all depends upon what the purpose of the fee is at the local level of its charge versus at the state level. As Michael alluded to, if it's approved by the state legislature, is that a problem? If you're having the agency adopt it at the local level, they still need to look at it on a cost justification basis under Proposition 218. And ultimately, they couldn't simply say we're going to allow low-income customers not to have to pay the fee unless there's some offsetting revenue that they have to allow for that.
We can't use an income test to distribute costs without 2/3 voter approval. What we have done to try to approximate that is, in the trash context, it's a small can rate. In the water context, it's the super low tier, where you find a principled basis to say these costs are not associated with the initial 0 to 6 or 0 to 17. They're associated with heavier use. It is not a perfect match. There are some poor people with large families and therefore large water demand, and there are some wealthy people who are not using a whole lot of water. But generally speaking, those who waste water can afford to.
Thanks for the clarification. Thank you, though. I just want to make sure to clarify any misconceptions there, that it's really the Prop 218 hurdles are at the local level, and that there's, at the statewide level, there is a little more flexibility, but still has to comply with Prop 26 and other constitutional mandates.
Yes.
Yeah,
And-
sort of, tell me if this is it's just something, well, it might be inappropriate. Yeah. So, one of the things I've wondered, I know I've been putting words in the mouths of the plaintiffs, and I just noticed we don't have the Taxpayers Association here, and they've come to other hearings, and I can just find out. But they or others, are Lifeline, whoever wants to answer, were Lifeline rates singled out originally in 218? I just am not remembering, because that seems sort of cold.
I got into this.
I don't think that was, I get the purpose, which is, so, because I know there are agencies that would just use their utilities as a cash cow, and I get people's reaction to that, or as a way to move, when local agencies were all desperate to figure out how to deal in the Prop 13 with providing basic services, then we all moved to putting things on fees. I get that, but were Lifeline rates intentionally singled out as something that somebody thought was a terrible thing to do?
I got into this.
Not that much, except in some, it just seems cold, I'm sorry.
I got into this by being the poster child for the No on Prop 218 campaign, and the reason that a contract city attorney of a small city was the poster child is because no elected official wanted to be against the right to vote on taxes. SWRCB came in at the very end of the campaign, but until then it was sort of me. And I had an articulate debate with Joel Fox saying, Joel, this is going to take out low income rates and it's going to hurt those seniors who are sending you $25 a month because they're worried about losing their houses. And he said on the radio, no, it won't. Now, what he meant, perhaps, is that electric and gas were excluded from Prop 218. So your electric lifeline rate was fine until 26 passed, and your gas lifeline rate was fine until 26 passed. I think it was probably a drafting oversight, that what they were trying to do, and you can see why they would want to, given the overlap between the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association and the California Apartment Association, which share staff and resources and have common constituents. Their perspective was they didn't want cities living off the water department. They didn't want high water bills subsidizing inefficient bureaucracy elsewhere, and they wanted to make sure that their constituency was only paying for what they were getting. And they drafted a measure that had unintended consequences.
But they continued it in 26.
And 218, different constituency, and they knew what they were doing. 218 has three components. Taxes, which were well understood. They were just moving them from the statutory law into the Constitution. Assessments, which John Kupal spent a lot of time refining and polishing. And then at the very end, they did some polling and had some insights that we crafty public lawyers would do an end run against their tax fix and their assessment fix by using fee authority. So they created this new doctrine on the fly, slapped it together, and sent it into the Secretary of State's office to create this category of property-related fees, and it never got to a committee on third reading. We're doing that now.
Michael's right. The constituency for 26 was different than it was for Proposition 218. although there
Constituency for
was a
26 is the
Chamber of Commerce.
not Howard Jarvis.
Indulging me, that clarification. Ms. Seaton, sorry. Phoebe Seaton, followed by Mark Weston, Board Chair for the San Diego County Water Authority.
I'd like you to forget everything you just heard about the inability to consider lower income users when considering conservation rates and affordability. I'm really want to echo what Jenny said. She said it much more eloquently than I have or can, but I figured since I put on a suit today, I might as well talk. We're very, very supportive, of course, of looking at pricing comprehensively to address conservation and address affordability, and see this as a fabulous opportunity. Looking at 218 and beyond, we are admittedly quite concerned about larger families and flexible households. We see a lot, especially in the farm worker populations, we see changing sizes of households, and so we want the board to be cognizant of that. And so how do you track, if you somehow do create a program that tracks along with household size, which we're seeing in Cantua Creek, where there is some flexibility around household size, that how do you account for those homes that grow during the growing season and shrink? Also, kind of homeless populations that are moving in and out of housing. So wanted to be especially highlight those issues. And
I think we
again,
did okay on that in the conservation stuff. If I think about all the phone calls Eric and Max had to deal with the population numbers where you have different numbers of people in a given time. And then we really were focusing on per person per day, partially for that.
yeah, and definitely appreciate that. So trying to figure out how to make that work going forward in the context of 218, or if we just need to address 218 once and for all. And then again, kind of echoing the need to look at conservation beyond domestic users, industrial and agriculture, and that everybody has to play a part. Thanks so much.
Mr. Weston, followed by Tracy Taylor from the Mesa Water District.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the board and staff. Thank you for letting us speak today. I'm Mark Weston, Chair of the San Diego County Water Authority, representing 3.2 million people and 24 member agencies. So we provide the wholesale water to all of San Diego County. And I appreciate the comments earlier that we are doing a good job in San Diego. We really have done everything we think is the right thing to do to be good water managers. We've created new water supplies through transfers, lining canals. We have created recycled water programs, very large conservation program. We have groundwater desalination, and we will be bringing on seawater desalination in the very near future. So we have sent a letter from the authority on our thoughts about tiered pricing and the role that the state board could provide. And then I came here and a California Water Policy Conference broke out. So I think it's great to talk about some of these items that have come up through the various speakers. I am the chair of the board, and I want to say that I also am a past general manager of the second largest water district in San Diego County. And so I think my comments are more apropos to the function of being a general manager, and I think it'll help and maybe give you some perspective, some thoughts. So back in 1990, when we experienced our first major drought in Southern California, many of the agencies, and our agency that I ultimately became general manager for, implemented tiered water rates, along with the threat that we're going to run out of water if we don't save water. So we experienced about a 33% water conservation in just a very short period, 3 years. Tiered water rates work. There's no question about it. Whether it's just a straight tiered water rate or an allocation-based water budget methodology, they work. So moving through the rest of the 90s, we experienced a very wet cycle. Usage came back, but nowhere anywhere close to where it was. So we had a kind of a base of about 25% water conservation embedded into our customer base. Then in the 2000s, we saw the beginning of the new drought lining up, particularly in the Colorado River Basin. So in the early 2000s, we started to get concerned about the next drought. So we prepared and I think we were the first large agency at the Water Authority to do this, and I was a general manager, helped prepare it, was a drought response plan. And in that were conservation drought pricing and a model ordinance that I think every agency adopted that would allow additional pricing signals, penalty pricing signals, if a declaration of drought was made. So if Met allocated water to the Water Authority, then that would kick in the potential of drought pricing. Put that on the shelf, thought we had done a really good job, and 2 years later, the 2007-8 drought hit in full force. We then implemented a variety of other tools that were in place. We had outreach. By then, we had implemented devices throughout all of the member agencies. We were the leading agency that led a lot of the water conservation legislation, including the meters, required to have meters throughout the state. So we were thinking long-term. We drove the the high efficiency toilets and washing machines. We drove all of that, those devices. So when the drought hit, here is what happened as a general manager's thinking. We used the tools back in the 90s. Let's put them on steroids. So what we did was we started thinking about taking our cost of service studies, figuring out what our revenue requirements were, and then really tilting the tiers so that the upper tiers gave a really, really loud signal. Now, not everybody adopted those, but there were some agencies that had incredibly steep tiers. The agency I ran, we started to implement it, and we had such pushback from our residents, ratepayers, that we said, well, let's take another run at it. So we went back to our kind of a low, a pretty moderate tiered structure. But there were agencies that said, we're going to show the signal. And then I think what happened is there was obviously some pushback, and we're seeing now lawsuits that are saying, nope, you went too far. Tiered pricing works, and we think that there is absolutely a place in rate structures for tiered pricing. I think with the San Juan case, it means you have to do it more carefully. Let's not overreach, but that makes it difficult for the state board, which says we really want to send really loud signals on water conservation. So I think that balance between doing it correctly through the process and still achieving water conservation. And the way you achieve it is through all the other things you do: devices, landscaping standards, all of the messaging that is done, both state and local messaging. So there are a variety of ways that we can see conservation occurring. Now, after 2009-10, we saw a tremendous savings, again, about a 25% reduction, but you also have to remember that we had an economic collapse at the same time. So we had houses that were vacant, we had foreclosures going on. So our usage has come back a little bit, but every time we go through these cycles, we are embedding more and more long-term water conservation. So the last thing I have to share with you is, as I'm sitting here listening to things to think about, how prescriptive does the state board want to be? Do you want to really get involved in setting use standards, and anything over that will be penalties that will generate revenue that will either go to the local agency or back to the state? That, to me, is probably the biggest policy question that you're going to be wrestling with if you're thinking about that. It would be the same as going to the ag community and saying, we're going to tell you how much water you can use per acre, and if you use anything over that, we're going to penalize you. So it's a really, really difficult policy question. Having been in this for 40 years, perspective is interesting, history is interesting, but these are really big things to think about for the State Board.
What can we do to give you and other local suppliers the tools, wholesalers and suppliers, the tools that they need to institute, whether it's that drought penalty or rate-based more effectively, or for those that haven't even implemented it all, get them the tools that they need?
I think for the forward-thinking agencies, whether it's the Water Authority as a wholesale agency or the retail agencies, they're doing that advanced planning. They're planning for future water supplies. They're losing water from imported supplies, so they're replacing it with recycled water or desalinated water or clean up groundwater supplies. In terms of rate structures, we just know that we have to do it correctly. We've had to do it correctly for decades. To stand up to any challenge, we have to do rates that are clearly meet the law. We now have some new law. This will give any retail agency a moment of pause. Go back and look at your cost of service study, see if you've accounted for all of the costs and assigning those costs appropriately to the classes and to the tiers. But if you just want to send the loudest signal of use less water by putting a $10 cost on it over the $1 cost that the standard rate is, I think obviously we're going to have trouble. The last thought I had, if I can just have one last little thought, I've heard the issue of affordability and water quality for disadvantaged communities. I think that that's also an incredible topic. In California, we shouldn't have communities that don't have pure drinking water, at least for inside their homes. And it's a very interesting policy question for you to wrestle with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thoughtful. Hi, Ms. Taylor. Stacy Taylor, followed by Drew Atwater from Moulton Niguel Water District.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the board, and esteemed colleagues and guests. I am Stacy Taylor. I'm the Public and Government Affairs Manager for Mesa Water District, and I realize I might be a bit of an outlier in the room here today. We do employ a uniform volumetric rate. That is very different from a flat rate, and I hear, not just in this room today, but a lot of conversation amongst our public and press confusing the two. So a little bit later, I'll take a moment to clarify that. But I will summarize also our comments in our letter that we submitted to the board. And I want to start by thanking the board for exploring this very important issue of water conservation pricing. And we appreciate your commitment to ensuring a thorough and open process for addressing Directive 8 of the Governor's Executive Order. So we agree that one way to encourage conservation is indeed through conservation pricing and providing a strong economic signal on the water's cost to the water's users through our rates. And Mesa Water does do this in two ways. First, we might be a little unique for Orange County in that we do not receive any property taxes. So all of our operations must be fully funded by our rates. And that makes up almost 100% of our revenues. The true cost of water service is thus fully reflected in the rates. So it is a very strong price signal on the value and the cost of water. Second, because Mesa Water has one supply source, which is groundwater, and one service pressure area, if you will, we are a 18 square mile dense area, and that means our costs are uniform. And so in order for us to be Prop 218 compliant, we need to use the uniform volumetric rate option, which is deemed to be a conservation-based pricing by the California Urban Water Conservation Council. So to further clarify, like I started my talk with, the difference between a uniform volumetric rate and a flat rate is that a uniform volumetric rate, it's a really bad nomenclature. I like a consistent per unit cost. I think that much better reflects our water rate cost for potable drinking water is $3.40 a unit. And so if you use 1 unit, it's $3.40. If you use 2 units, it's double, $6.80, and so on and so forth. So for any given billing period, if customers use twice as much water, they pay twice as much, 3 times, 4 times, et cetera. And if they use half, they pay half. So this is different from a flat rate in that a flat rate the flat rates are maybe still used in some areas that are non-metered, but they could be still used in areas that are becoming metered or recently metered. And that just charges customers the same fee for service no matter how much you use. So, $50 a month, use however much water you want. And that does not provide customers with a water pricing signal to conserve. So I hope that clarifies the difference between flat rates and uniform volumetric rates.
I just have a quick question. Then how are you encouraging conservation beyond that? Because clearly part of the purpose of this is that there are agencies that want to use, we're not saying you have to use pricing, we're saying that want to use pricing, and we're here to try and figure out, can we be helpful in that? So what else are you doing? Because your numbers aren't that great yet. So I assume you have stuff in the works.
So we're using every tool in the shed. And also we do support all of the other conservation-based pricing. So tiered rates, allocation, budget-based, I'm not standing up here to say, one rate structure is better than another. For us, the uniform volumetric helps us comply with the Prop 218 tenets, as well as achieving the conservation. So far for June, we have gone at least 20%, if not more, which is our service area's reduction mandate. And we've also met the 20 by 2020. But in addition to that, and I think the gentleman just before me spoke about the other tools, rebates on devices, encouraging water use efficiency through a robust outreach program. We have a campaign right now called Let's All Be Mesa Water Savers. And so, and I'm overseeing that campaign, so I take great pride in our outreach. We also use landscape ordinances and the plumbing codes. So we're throwing everything at it. And so our letter really proposed 2 ideas for the board. And one is just that equity, equality in terms of let's not overreach and be prescriptive on rate structures, and let the locals achieve. We're very achievement oriented, so no one size fits all. Like I said, every one of the rate structures that are conservation-based pricing per the California Urban Water Conservation Council could work, and all are deemed potentially Prop 218 compliant as well. And then also education, which I heard, I'm echoing, I heard a lot of that here today, to inform water providers. I like the clearinghouse idea of case studies and success stories and information on resources on how we can harmonize these 2 concepts currently in the Constitution and use drought penalties to the fullest extent that we're able to. And I think those have proven to be very effective as well. So to conclude, we do understand that we have a dire need for conservation as the California way of life. And it's not just now, during the serious drought, it's forevermore. And we want to help ensure the ongoing efficient use of water in urban, environmental, and other needs. So with that, I'll thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Atwater, followed by Ed Osan from the Natural Resources Defense Council.
Thank you. Sorry. My name is Drew Atwater. I work at Molten Miguel Water District. And just to start off, I wanted to thank your staff for putting together a wonderful three panels this afternoon, which I think covered a wide breadth of issues in rate setting and provided a good introduction to the wide variety of issues from the technical aspects and economic issues of the value of water between that and cost, and the legal issues that currently dealing with in the water community. Another issue that came up was the idea of using penalties for use above an efficiency target. I just wanted to mention that effective July 1st, Molten Eagle Water District has a penalty for any usage above individual water budgets that results in a price of $9.04 per 100 cubic feet. So that's just one of the kind of tools that water agencies have that I think will just put it into place. But we're very hopeful, and I think it'll send a very strong price signal for customers to be efficient. The other kind of issues that were brought up were some of the differences between the electric industry this morning and the water community. And over the past 20 years, the electric industry has been very progressive in implementing a lot of behavioral science tools through the use of a lot of data to provide very targeted marketing and conservation rate structures. And I think that a big discussion needs to happen if there's an appetite for going in that direction is a larger discussion on the need for more data in the water community in terms of what's a good data source, what's how to integrate it with other demographic and other climate data and all those kinds of things, and how to use it for some of the analytics that Professor Barenclaw talked about in terms of what's the effect of conservation programs, what's the effect of rate structures, and how those impact usage broadly. And I think that those are larger discussions that would be more targeted through some sort of technical working group that would be very helpful, I think, in pushing those forward. And that's the bulk of my discussion. The other is just on the legal issues. I think it's kind of an introduction to some of the legal issues, but I think that it's something that moving forward is some sort of technical working group on the legal issues itself and how to create some sort of solutions for a lot of the issues that were brought up in regards to making more targeted, very strong conservation pricing signals more legally defensible than they currently. So, thank you.
Thank you. Good ideas. Appreciate it. Mr. Osan, followed by Fiona Sanchez from the Irvine Ranch Water District.
Good
All
afternoon,
right,
Madam Chair.
Ed, solve it for us.
Well, we submitted a letter for the record, and you'll find most of the answers you're looking for in our letter. And I won't repeat them all right now. I actually want to start by commending, first of all, the governor, of course, and the board for raising the pricing issues. In years past, state officials have sort of been allergic to the whole subject of water pricing.
And have you known that finance, whatever the finance chapter is of anything, you name it, is always put off until the end and needs an extension?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, and I think you've heard ample evidence here today that the critical importance and relationship between pricing and efficiency. You heard some good observations from the legal panel that you had today. There are opportunities still to maintain conservation pricing consistent with Proposition 218 and consistent with the San Juan Capistrano decision. Admittedly, if Capistrano becomes settled law, it appears that budget-based or allocation-based rates will have rougher sledding. But frankly, we don't view the decision as placing major barriers in front of tiered pricing. I think it's important not to conflate the two. Budget-based rates are a type of tiered pricing, but they inject into that calculus, of course, very site-specific considerations and, frankly, value judgments of the utility itself about what constitutes efficient use. And that's going to be harder to link back to cost of service in the future if the decision stands as is. But tiered pricing itself, reflecting actual cost profiles of the utilities, should really not be in jeopardy. Virtually every California Urban Water Agency is a summer peaking system. And peaking within, even just within the residential class, is a real basis for the establishment of tiers. I'd like to kind of paint a picture for you here. Without the benefit of a PowerPoint, I'll try to keep it really simple. Envision a community, a local water system, that has an average annual water consumption of 10 million gallons a day. That's the average annual. Now, in California, given our monthly profiles, and you have all the water suppliers now reporting on a monthly basis, and you see those movements, this community that has 10 MGD on an annual average basis could well have, in the winter months, 8 MGD, and in the summer months, 12 MGD. Okay? And 50% peak to trough, that would not be at all unusual in California. Now, for that community, what would you imagine the size of the treatment plant is? It could easily be 15 MGD, because treatment has to be, and other components of the system have to meet peak day demand. So think now of all of the capacity that gets built into that system to meet peak day demand, which is largely driven by landscape water use, and much of it in the residential sector. So it's only appropriate to deliver a price signal for that use, for the drivers of that use, and that can form the basis for tiers. We would argue every increment of capacity above the 8 MGD should be allocated to some degree to the upper tiers. And that's the variable side of the rate, the volume-based part of the rate. Don't overlook what can be done with the fixed charges. The Prop 218 notice that was developed for Davis, where a consumption-based fixed charge was first proposed, we attached that to our submission to the board. It's an extremely interesting concept. Unfortunate that it was not actually adopted in Davis, but not because of a flaw in the consumption-based fixed charge. It is a way of getting at this conundrum between high fixed costs and the need to send a water-conserving signal when you can allocate fixed cost based on the immediate prior year's consumption. It can be very reliable, just as reliable as the meter charge, and yet sends a conservation price signal. And I think I'm about out of time. We have recommended, there are things you can do. I think the one message that I would like to convey is you're not powerless to act here. The governor has directed that there be some action. We think there are some things you can do. We think you can start with, maybe not start, but at some point over the next number of months, begin work on a policy resolution on conservation pricing and identify the elements of conservation pricing that the board can embrace, can recommend. And then you can find venues for applying those concepts as you review permits, as you award grants and loans, and as you develop regulations. You can develop regulations not only for rate-making policies, but on that matrix that the council developed of enhancements of the price signal. You've got a whole menu there of measures that some of which are so clearly beneficial that they could conceivably be developed into regulatory requirements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sanchez, followed by David Bowen from the Association of California Water Agencies.
Hi. And Chair Marcus and fellow board members. Irvine Ranch Water District, I think you already know, did adopt our allocation-based rates back in 1991, so we've now had them in place for 25 years. We have just completed a very rigorous cost of service study We've done that over the last couple of months, actually, after the San Juan case came out, because we were already in the process of doing a cost of service study. And in looking at that case, we were obviously very careful to make sure we met all of the legal requirements, but we have made modifications to our rate structure also in light of the current drought, and we have reduced our outdoor potable allocation by 30%. To our customers. So we're now at 60% of ET, and our indoor we reduced last year down to 50. So we have a very aggressive rate structure designed to send a very strong price signal so we can really effectively target those wasteful customers. That went into effect July 1st. But as we looked at it, we are fortunate that we do have multiple sources of supply. We have local sources, we have groundwater, we also have imported sources of supply. And looking at cost of service, the cost of water is one component of that. Our service is much broader than just providing water, the actual physical component. And so we do build in other costs to that. Obviously conservation, and then we have extraordinary conservation really targeted at our wasteful tier. We also include costs for water banking program, because that is an extraordinary source of supply that we would only normally utilize in a drought. And then we also include, it was mentioned by someone else earlier, that we include treatment for urban runoff. That's part of our scope of service, and there's a clear nexus with runoff and over irrigation. So we are able to build up a tiered rate, an allocation-based rate based on cost of service. All that said, we do think that the San Juan ruling certainly inhibits and limits flexibility for agencies to really effectively send strong price signals in looking at tiered rates. For example, if we only had one source of supply, it would be much more difficult for us to really compile the cost of service that would justify these various tiers. And so we have been working on a legislative proposal that we have been working on together with Eastern to try and address some of the issues raised from the San Juan case. But we are open to other paths and vehicles, but we do feel that it would be important to try to look at what we could do to address some of the limitations, perhaps, to agencies to really have effective price signals. So we would encourage the State Board to look at that and be happy to work with you if there's maybe a technical work group or somebody that might be looking at that particular effort. One of the things that I also was just going to mention, because it came up earlier, related to the value of water. Because we do have local groundwater and imported water supplies, our local groundwater basin is managed by the Orange County Water District. And so they are including in the cost that they pass to us as a rate, costs for the groundwater replenishment. They are including costs for cleanup and things like that. It is passed along to us as a standard rate per unit. And so when we pass it through to our customers, we don't have a way to further break that down. So I just wanted to point that out, and kind of it's the same with our wholesale imported rate. Those costs are embedded in the rates they charge to us, so for us it would be difficult to kind of assess that and break it down out to individual customers. So I just wanted to make that point. And then another question that you guys had earlier was, you asked whether or not, with the Eastern case, whether they could determine how much was attributable to messaging or to the rate structure itself. I was just going to mention again, it's an IRWD case only, so maybe not replicable, but we had a part of our service area that had consolidated with us, and part of the terms of the agreement was on uniform rates for a certain period of time until they bought into our system. So that particular community was getting all the same messaging, all the same rebate programs, everything the same as the rest of our service area on allocation-based rates. And we did do an independent study back in 2008, and that study quantified that the impact of just the rates alone was about 8% with the allocation-based rate structure. I think overall allocation-based rates have worked very well for us. However, as we indicated in our comment letter, rate setting is very complex. I think we all would, in this room, would certainly agree with that. And it needs to be kind of really looked at from a local perspective and provide local flexibility. And so every agency needs to have that ability to set rates that make sense for its community and its service area and to make appropriate investments. I think the California Urban Conservation Council's matrix is a good example of providing different flexibility and options. But I would just, I think that needs to be, in any action that the State Board may consider, retaining local flexibility is very key. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Boland, followed by John Mills.
Thank you, Chair Marcus, members of the board. David Boland with the Association of California Water Agencies.
SaveOurWater.com.
SaveOurWater.com. You can go live now. Operators are standing by. So the comments today are about water pricing. I don't think there's much about water pricing on Save Our Water, but a lot of good stuff about conservation, and it's really important at the consumer level as well as the all the various sectors that the agencies are working with to try to get the message across.
Can I ask you a question? Maybe I should have asked you this yesterday, but I forgot. You know, I have been pitching SaveOurWater.com wherever I can, and I talked about it on a Canadian radio broadcast because particularly in BC, they're just in the beginning of a drought, so they wanted to hear what are the kinds of things. So I pitched Save Our Water and talked about how they could just download the campaigns, but afterwards I thought, do you have to be a California Water Agency to do that?
I don't think so, actually.
I didn't remember seeing when I went through it.
You don't even have to be a
anyway.
water agency, I don't think, to link to it. So it's, you know, I guess I would defer that question. That's a somewhat technical question to the Department of Water Resources.
If you have any Canadians, don't spank them for taking your stuff, because I told them they
Well,
could.
they could probably take the stuff and then repurpose it. There is no, and we do encourage that. A lot of good stuff there that can be repurposed, lots of logos, people put their own customized content on, and so it is a really robust vehicle. But that is not the purpose of my comments today. My comments are related to our comment letter on the process here. First of all, I want to thank the board again for these panels, a lot of focused discussion. It has been kind of a water policy venue here, and a lot of moving parts. Interesting legal issues, political issues, issues of proper public policy. All of these things are tied together. The place that Fiona left, where she kind of into her comments about the need to preserve flexibility, is the place I'll segue in. Aqua's comment letter, we try to essentially frame that as our main desire, and at this point in our main focus for our comments is the context that this is about location, location, location. This is about very specific local contexts. Every agency has its own situations in terms of its ability to serve and the financial issues that they face and the ratepayers and all these other issues. And I think the legal context really underscored the importance of fact-based policymaking that is fine-grained, and it will have to get resolved at a local level. So we want to encourage the Water Board to continue to keep that idea in mind, that this is about the local agencies doing this work and sending the price signal. We did want to underscore the fact that we appreciate and have noted our colleague agency, the California Urban Water Conservation Council, and that many of our water agencies are members of the council. Again, kind of a subset. It'd be great to have a Venn diagram someday to show all the relationships. But a lot of our member agencies as leaders in Aqua are also leaders in the council and have done a lot of great work on this issue of conservation pricing and sending a signal for a long time. This matrix has been vetted widely. It's going to be worked on for a while now, a couple of years in the council, and we expect there'll be some pretty good results. And it'll be interesting to compare and contrast the different approaches, the different options to BMP 1.4. And we encourage the Water Board to follow that process and maybe support it in some ways, whatever ways are appropriate. As far as the drought-related charges and penalties, there are these authorities that local agencies have. Some of them are exercising those authorities and they have strong support for them. Others have chosen not to for various reasons. Again, we encourage the Water Board to be aware of those authorities and possibly even to act as a clearinghouse, and I'll have that in a second as a recommendation for a role. But as a venue, I guess, for daylighting where these agencies are doing these kinds of charges and surcharges and fees and penalties and all kinds of other mechanisms that they have the authority to do. In many cases, they have different kinds of authorities. Different kinds of agencies are able or not to do different kinds of authorities. And so, again, it's a local decision, but we think it's an important tool, especially for drought. And then the possible role for the Water Board Public education, number one thing, the profile here, the visibility of this issue has gone way up, in the last year or so, based on the regulatory process that we're in and the target setting. Obviously, rates are part of that, and again, we would expect that the Water Board will continue to highlight the issue, and we welcome that public attention and the fact that we need to inform water users statewide, kind of at the general level, kind of at the Save Our Water level, that we're all in this in terms of this drought, we're all in this need to conserve, and we all need to value that resource and understand what goes into it, and that this is not like cable. This is not like anything. This is a pretty unique resource that we are together stewards of, and that we need to understand how to price it and how to value it, and how to properly send that signal, and then as citizens, how to consume that product and support the local decision makers as they figure out how best to provide that service to communities. And so we would encourage the Water Board to partner with the water industry as a whole to try to keep sending those signals about the value of water. Clearinghouse role, we already have a great database that's being built. We heard several presenters talk about different kinds of data needs and the idea that it is hard to extract in one place that centralized data repository. And so there may be ways in which the Water Board can support or provide a portal to lots of information about rates, rate setting structures, and other types of conservation-related documentation of policy content, and maybe even technical information that could then be used by various folks to do either academic studies or even more technical studies. And then finally,
one of
funding.
those things that, and don't worry about the time, that is one of those things where I think is a definite, there are a lot of things to ponder in terms of follow-up, but that's definitely something for a follow-up conversation with you and our colleagues at DWR, et cetera, which is where's the most helpful place to put something like that, and then who has the best tools, and it may well be collective between the three of us and others to figure out how to get something in an intelligible, usable, findable way. The legal issues that Mr. Atwater talked about, et cetera. Also, there are all kinds of opportunities to be helpful that it can be happy to be at the Water Board if that's helpful, but we'll want to talk with you all and DWR and others to figure out, how do we overlap our information base, the drinking water inventory that many people probably didn't realize we actually had, because that's a different pathway historically. There may be a real sweet spot here.
And I appreciate your mentioning the Department of Water Resources and all the data that is housed there and all the other state agencies that have a piece of this. And so there needs to be a way in which we get at, what is usable. The one issue that did come up kind of tangentially and I want to underscore is the fact that information, just huge amounts of information for its own sake, is not necessarily going to be in the public's interest. Especially if it's costly to maintain that and continue to supply it, and it doesn't provide value. But that's obviously the tension that we'll need to resolve. And then funding, there have been some themes about the idea of trying to get money to folks, particularly agencies that are struggling right now to make ends meet. They do have some tools, but they could be incentivized. We do use incentives, and I look, particularly to Board Member Spivey Weber about the comment about maybe not necessarily providing grants to everybody, and that's understandable, but to use them strategically to incentivize certain types of investments that may need to occur that aren't seen to be locally cost effective at the present time. And some of this rate making and the infrastructure associated with administering this, the fancy AMI systems and so forth, are extremely expensive and very difficult to rationalize in a small community in a place where they are serving low-income populations and they can't distribute those costs in an appropriate way. And so there may be ways in which the state can partner, and I guess I would encourage a robust conversation about just maybe, I don't know what vehicles are, but different funding techniques that might be used to try to incentivize investments in higher-end water management, particularly as it relates to water rates and conservation. that concludes my comments. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have 2 more speakers, but I want to give my 2 colleagues who need to leave a chance to put in a parting word before you run out the door.